Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending. I can certainly empathize with Johan in opening the day's sessions. It feels like it's a plenary session, but again, it's not. It's just a regular talk. So I've got to start with a naughty little confession. Almost everybody here is, well, very well versed in the natural sciences. I myself am a little bit of an imposter. I'm a social scientist. But hopefully my passion for nature gives me a pass to stand on the stage, which I'm privileged to stand on. But that said, now that's not me, just in case anybody has some rotten potatoes here. This is actually one of the participants in our study. And that's another one, and another one, and another one. So these are some of the realities that we face among communities that are located in areas that have a lot of biodiversity and are ecologically sensitive. And when conservationists, they finally started to catch on to this whole thing that we cannot leave the human element out of ecological systems. And in approaches such as community-based conservation, the recognition is there that we need to take the role of local communities into account. We cannot just ignore them. They're integral components of social ecological systems, and they are active participants in them. What they do or don't do has an impact. So there's a challenge to understand community dynamics and to strike a balance between community imperative or conservation imperatives and community needs. So we conducted a study, me and my colleague at Nature's Valley Trust, Professor Hendrik Coetzee, and the aim of our study was to identify, quantify, and qualify the needs, assets, and levels of psychosocial well-being, nature connectedness, and environmental beliefs and attitudes in Kurland and Covie. And we did this with the aim of understanding implications for conservation and for community development, and to kind of create a set of recommendations for how to get to that. And this was also the basis of the development of the community-based cycle of practice model that my colleague Henry elucidated in an earlier talk. Now, it was a fairly comprehensive study looking at various aspects, some of them going beyond just conservation, so I'm going to try my best in fitting in the parts that perhaps are more interesting. As an academic, I'm particularly talented at fitting 50 words into a sentence that should contain 20 words and 30 slides into a presentation that should have 10. So we're going to see if we're going to get through everything. But because of this, the focus is more on highlighting what is relevant and ways of thinking than trying to be comprehensive, which is just going to be a data dump that, is going to be very non-memorable. So the area in which we did the study, as you can see there, most of you might be familiar with it. So Nature's Valley being situated right here, Covie right there, Kurland right there, both relatively informal communities, with Kurland a little bit more developed, still underdeveloped, but more infrastructure. It's a primary school, tarred roads, library, basic town hall, that kind of thing, compared to Covie, which is much more rural, much more isolated, surrounded by nature, open veld, some bush, fynbos, that kind of a thing, much smaller population as well. So, but the idea here is not just to focus on Kurland and Covie, but to use them almost as case studies of dynamics that would exist in other similar communities, because I think it's important to have the kind of findings and insights that are transferable to other contexts. So the method, now I know there are many academics who get slightly aroused at methodological talk, but I know for many people this is not, it's the part that they just want to get past. So I'm not going to linger on this too long and for the sake of time. So we used a sequential explanatory mixed methods design. You can read the bottom parts, but basically what that entails, starting off with a quantitative phase to quantify what is going on so that you have generalizable results that speak for the community. Then going back in with a qualitative phase where you do interviews with selectively or purposefully selected participants, and the aim there is to clarify, to explain the findings that come from your quanti data, because your quanti data often tells you about the what. They have this need, they have that asset, but it doesn't often give you the nuance, the context, the why, whereas with this qualitative phase we can actually then find out the reasons, the more kind of nuanced mechanics that are hard to capture in ones and zeros. So as for the results, and I'm going to skip over some of the first parts, it's going to be on the slides for those who want to dig into them, and as I've said, I want to highlight rather a few things with specific significance rather than get stuck on trying to cram in every single finding. So in terms of community needs, jobs, the need for jobs and unemployment was one of the biggest challenges and related needs. Healthcare was a big challenge. So was policing, skills development, training, safety, security, tertiary education, all of these. So it was a 5-point scale where, one, actually it should have started at 1, but 1 is, it's a very low need, 3 is a moderate need, 5 is a very high need. So as we can see, pretty much everything is moderate to higher, which is typical in these underdeveloped communities, but jobs and income being the highest. So later on, we're going to contextualize this a little bit in terms of social theory and then make a bit more sense of it rather than just looking at the numbers. Then we also looked at community assets. And same scale was used, and we can see that the skills of local people, the quality of existing schools and teachers, in this case it was Craig's Primary School, safety and security, healthcare, and all of this were seen as assets. Safety and security occurs in both because the community members said although it is deteriorating in the community, it's still better than other communities that they're aware of, and so on. Interesting, the natural environment wasn't regarded as a particular asset, and we'll revisit this again. We looked at psychosocial well-being, and the model that we use, which was developed by the sociologist Corey Keyes, looks at psychosocial well-being in terms of 3 dimensions. Psychological well-being, that's the extent to which you're happy, which was moderately high in this community, 4.87, it's a 6-point scale. Emotional well-being, which is the extent to which you're satisfied with your life and you feel that life is good, that was moderately high too. But then social well-being was comparatively lower. Now, although it is slightly above average, if we look at similar communities, we find it's generally a bit higher. So that suggests that there are some things that are detracting from the social well-being in the community. So that's the sense to which you feel good and safe in your community, your neighborhood, your environment. You have meaningful connections and relations and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to go into the reasons for this, but in the next phase we followed up on this and we figured out what these things are. Some of them go beyond the focus of ecological conservation kind of focus. So again, I'm not going to stand still on them, but we are going to revisit this in a moment. So nature connectedness was something we also looked at, and the sad news is that we found low levels of nature connectedness. Residents did not assign value to nature, it was just a background thing. So if we asked them about nature, many of them were almost perplexed. It's like if you ask people, what do you think about air? It's like, oh yeah, air. It's just there. It doesn't merit any particular attention. It didn't evoke any particular response. It was simply just a peripheral background against which life unfolded itself. However, that said, as we saw from the talks yesterday, higher levels of nature connectedness correlated with higher levels of well-being. So the people who were more connected to nature, even if it was on the low end of the scale, their well-being, their psychological well-being was higher. Littering was very high in the communities, and you can read there for yourself, and we'll revisit this in a moment. And I'm going to skip through this. This is a very text-dense slide, my apologies. Again, it's that academic affliction of trying to stuff too much into too little space. Again, but I promise it won't be too many of them to follow. So Covie was a little bit different. Being in a more rural area, nature was more valued. And we also found that in terms of their identity, there was a very strong sense of a social identity of them as a fishing community. And we're going to get back to that in a moment. So I'm skipping through this fast so we can get to the more interesting bits at the end. And because of this, also, one of the things that we found is that in the past, bag and size limits were followed. But now that fishing is no longer allowed, fishermen just catch everything they can without regard for bag limits. And we, again, also going to revisit this in a moment. So we also had some issues with the fact that in Covie there were troubles with roaming troops of baboons. And we also found as a community asset that there was a lot of knowledge of the use of indigenous plants, things like honeybush tea, things like using plants for medicinal purposes that in terms of medical care. Many of the people in this community still relied on this and had a lot of knowledge about this, but didn't even regard it as an asset or see it as one. And also this was getting lost with each generation. So the young people were reportedly not interested in this. So there could be quite a lot of value in initiatives aimed at understanding this. So now getting to the more interesting part, the understanding the why. So this is where the social science part comes in to try and make sense of some of these findings. So a simple theory that is used a lot in psychology is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which very simply means that we have a hierarchy of needs, and for each need to emerge, a need beneath it must be fulfilled. So we start off with survival needs, safety, security, needs for belonging, acceptance, status and esteem, and then self-actualization needs. So only here do you start to do things for their own sake. Beauty for its own sake, like art, something like this, conservation for its own sake. We see it's true for humans and animals. An antelope that is thirsty enough will risk his own security and safety by going to a waterhole, even though there might be a predator there, to get food. But once that thirst is slaked, they will not go near there because now this need emerges. Now, the problem is that if we look at that need analysis we did before, Kurland and Covie very much fall at the level of safety and security, survival needs. They need jobs, they need food, they need healthcare, they need this. The issue is that nature preservation, intrinsic values, as we saw in one of the talks yesterday, is correlated with these higher level needs. So they only emerge as a thing once people have these bottom needs satisfied reliably. Before that, they don't. But the problem is many interventions, nature-based interventions or conservation-based interventions are pitched at this kind of level. They may work very well for people who have these needs fulfilled, but to people here, they don't give a damn about nature, as I've said in the opening quote. So at this level, nature orientation values tend to correlate with utilization or instrumental values. So if you are at this level, nature is a source of food, water, and shelter, or security in one way or another. Here, it may be, being part of a community or something, but how you see nature is going to change depending on where you are. If we have community-based interventions that are reliant on nature connectedness, they are likely to fail. So we need to frame our interventions in terms of how can nature help me to survive, to put food on the table, to make me more safe and secure, even if it's indirect. Then another theory, and I'll just skip over that because I know we're getting close to the end of the time. Self-efficacy theory is something that we can use to understand why communities experience the things they do. And it basically says that what people do or don't do is very much tied with a sense of their belief in their ability to do it. Can we make a difference? So we've seen that with littering and with a few other things. This communities, both of them had an external locus of control and low self-efficacy. Like things will only change if someone else comes in. So we see a community that's reliant on grants, reliance on other people coming in and doing things. And over time, this has led to learned helplessness and a lack of any initiative to change things. So there are strategies that can be used, like facilitating mastery experiences where self-efficacy can be built. So we need to focus on these things as well. Then social identity theory, and almost getting to the end, is another framework that we can use to make sense of it. And it says that our membership of specific groups eventually lead to us adopting a certain identity of who I am, but it's a group identity. And this group identity then shapes, with it comes a set of norms, beliefs, and values, and our behavior then stem from this. So we are academics. We will not entertain conspiracy theories. We dress like this. We talk like this. And a lot of that proceeds from your ideas about who you are. So we had the same kind of thing happening in Covie. So I'll just use one example, and then I'll end off, where the social identity of being fishermen explained why they engaged in illegal fishing, why they would turn down other jobs and they were regarded as lazy, when in fact that identity compelled them to say, but the kind of job that is okay for me is fishing. And then I see this just repeated, last slide. So when we try to understand environmental impact, a lot of the things we see there are consequences of behaviors. But these behaviors come from emotional-based things, fears, desires, needs, motivations, which in turn stem from beliefs, values, norms, social identity, self-efficacy. And this is embedded in culture, context, and group membership. And if we want to try and change communities, first of all, we need to understand the community we try to work in. We should not over-focus on behavior because it's a downstream element. We should focus on the upstream elements. That's where the leverage for change lies. And then we should ride the horse in the direction it's going in. So align and frame interventions in terms of actual community needs and assets and their levels of motivation. And then there is value in enhancing nature connectedness, no matter where people may be, because it's correlated with higher well-being and pro-environmental behavior. And then as some of these needs fall beyond the scope of conservation, we need key partnerships to work on communities to fulfill their needs, because as they move up these levels of need fulfillment, we will see more pro-environmental behavior emerge. Thank you.